The wind in the Montana high country did not just howl. It tore. It was a living thing, a predator made of ice and speed, and it had been hunting Clara Dawson for days. It was early November, 1874, and the snows had come a month too soon, catching them on a high, forgotten pass. The wagon, already failing, gave up with a sound like a pistol shot. The rear axle, stressed beyond mortal endurance, snapped in two. The heavy box lurched, groaned, and settled into the deepening snowdrift with the finality of a coffin. Clara stood frozen for a beat, the sound swallowed by the gale. She did not feel the cold on her face, only the sudden, hollow drop in her stomach. Beside her, huddled under a threadbare blanket on the buckboard, her two children whimpered. "Mama?" Thomas, at 6, was old enough to know this was bad. Eliza, only 4, just pulled the wool tighter over her face. Clara swallowed the ice in her throat. "It is all right, Tom. We are just stuck for a moment." It was a lie, and the wind snatched it from her lips and hurled it into the gray, darkening trees. She climbed down, her boots sinking almost to the knee. One look confirmed it. The wheel was canted at a hopeless angle. The axle splintered into raw, woody teeth. They were not stuck. They were finished. Starvation had been a quiet fear for a week. Now, death by freezing was an immediate certainty. Dusk was falling, turning the snow from white to a bruised violet gray. She acted from a place deeper than thought. She pulled the children from the wagon, wrapping Eliza in the heaviest blanket until she was a small, cocooned bundle. She grabbed the satchel that held the last of the hardtack and her late husband's empty flask. "Thomas, you must hold my hand. Hold it tight and do not let go." He nodded, his small face pale. She put Eliza on her hip, took Tom's hand, and turned her back on the broken wagon, the last remnant of a life that had also broken apart. There was only one direction to go, uphill. The wind was slightly less biting when she turned toward the heavy pine, and she hoped, prayed, that the ridge might offer a shadow of shelter. The hike was an agony. The snow was a shifting enemy, collapsing under her weight, tangling her skirts, numbing her feet inside their worn leather boots. Eliza was a leaden weight, and Tom, brave as he tried to be, stumbled and fell every few yards. Clara hauled him up, her voice a raw rasp. "We must keep moving, just a little more." She did not know how long they walked. An hour, a lifetime. The world narrowed to the burning in her lungs and the screaming of her muscles. The forest was thick, the snow weighting the pine boughs until they drooped like weeping mourners. It was almost full dark when she saw it. Not a light, smoke, a thin gray tendril rising from the trees high up the slope. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "There, Tom, look, fire!" The hope gave her a last, desperate surge of strength. She pushed through a drift, scratching her face on a low-hanging branch, and stumbled into a small clearing. The cabin was not welcoming. It seemed less built by human hands and more grown from the mountain itself. It was made of thick, dark logs, chinked with mud, and half buried in a snowdrift. A single window, covered in what looked like scraped parchment, glowed a faint, dull orange. It was a fortress, secluded and silent, save for the wind whistling over its low-pitched roof. She left the children huddled by a large boulder, shielded from the worst of the wind. "Stay here. Do not move. I will be right back." She waded to the door, a single heavy slab of wood, and raised a hand that felt like a frozen club. She knocked. The sound was flat, deadened by the storm. She knocked again, harder, using the side of her fist. She heard a sound inside, a scrape, a heavy bar being lifted. The door opened a crack. The immediate blast of warm air, smelling of wood smoke and cooked meat, almost made her weep. A man filled the gap. He was large, built like the trees around his home, and covered in fur. A heavy beard, more gray than brown, covered his face to the cheekbones, but it was his eyes she saw first, narrowed in the dim light, and the long rifle he held balanced in the crook of his arm. The muzzle pointed not at her, but at the ground. "Ready?" He said nothing. He just looked. His eyes were cold, assessing her torn cloak, her frozen hair, the desperation clinging to her like a shroud. Clara found her voice. It was thin and cracked. "Please, sir, my children, we are—" She gestured back toward the boulder, her voice breaking. "Our wagon broke. We are freezing. Please, can we stay tonight?" Silas Ward looked past her, his gaze sweeping the clearing. He saw the two small shapes huddled in the snow. He looked back at the woman. He had lived alone for 5 years. He had chosen this place precisely because no one ever came. His solitude was his penance, and he guarded it like a trapline. This woman was trouble. She was the world, bringing its noise and its pain to his door. He saw the ice crystals on her eyelashes. He heard the girl, Eliza, let out a thin, terrified cough. His hesitation was long enough for Clara to feel the last of her hope begin to die. Then he grunted, the sound like rocks grinding together. He stepped back, pulling the heavy door open wider. The rifle did not move. "Get them inside!" Clara nearly fell in her haste. She ran back, grabbing Tom, lifting Eliza, and herding them through the doorway. Silas watched them stumble in, then close the door. The sound final. He dropped the heavy bar back into its iron brackets. The storm was gone, its roar muffled to a distant, angry moan. The cabin was one room, and it was spare. It was the cell of a man who owned nothing he did not need. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a black pot simmering over a low fire. On another wall, pelts were stretched and drying, wolf, beaver, and a large bear skin. A single cot, neatly made with fur blankets, sat in one corner. A rough-hewn table and 2 stools were in the center. It was functional, it was isolated, and it was warm. The children, drawn by an instinct older than memory, moved straight to the hearth and collapsed onto the stone ledge, soaking in the heat. Eliza was asleep instantly, her small face pale and waxen. Tom just shivered, his teeth chattering too hard to speak. Clara stood by the door, dripping melted snow onto the plank floor. The sudden warmth made her tremble violently. Her hands, raw and red, shook as she tried to unfasten the frozen ties of her bonnet. As she pulled her shawl tighter, the movement exposed the sleeve of her dress, revealing the dark, ugly bruises that circled her left forearm. She pulled the shawl back quickly, hiding her arm. But not before she saw the man's eyes flicker down to the marks, then back to her face. He registered it. He said nothing. Silas Ward moved without wasted motion. He ladled stew from the pot into 2 wooden bowls and handed one to her. It was thick with venison and root vegetables. He pointed to a bucket of water on a bench. He watched her for a moment, then turned his back, giving her a brief privacy to get the children settled. Clara knelt by the fire. She woke Tom gently. "Eat this, it is hot." She fed him first, spoonful by spoonful, until color returned to his cheeks. She took a few bites herself, the hot food searing a path to her empty stomach. She made a bed for the children from her own damp cloak near the fire, settling them close together. They were asleep in seconds, the exhaustion of the ordeal claiming them completely. Only then did she rise and face the man. He was sitting at the table, his own bowl of stew before him, the rifle now leaning against the wall, but still within reach. "There is straw in the corner," he said, his voice a gravelly monotone. He gestured with his chin. "And furs." "Thank you." Her voice was still a whisper. She sat on the stool opposite him. The silence in the cabin was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the scream of the wind outside. He ate slowly, deliberately. She did, too. He watched her. She felt his gaze, though she kept her own eyes down, fixed on the wooden grain of the table. He saw the worn gold wedding band on her left hand, a ring that seemed too large for her thin finger. He saw the hollows under her cheekbones, the sunken look of hunger that had been there long before today. And he saw her eyes. When she did, rarely, look up, they were watchful, terrified, darting to the door, to him, to her children. These were not the eyes of a woman simply lost in a storm. They were the eyes of a rabbit caught in a snare. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice low. "West," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Oregon. We have family there." Another lie. She had no one. "Bad time to cross the mountains. We had no choice," she said, and the truth of that statement hung bare between them. He finished his stew, rose, and put the bowl in a bucket. He looked at her. "The storm is settling in. You will be here for a few days." It was not an invitation. It was a fact. Clara just nodded, the new wave of panic rising. A few days, trapped here, with this silent, armed man. But the alternative was the white death outside. That night, she lay in the pile of straw and furs, her children curled against her. The man, Silas, lay on his cot across the small room. He did not undress, merely kicked off his boots and lay atop his blankets, one arm behind his head. The fire burned down to embers, casting long, strange shadows. Clara did not sleep. She listened to the breathing of her children and the absolute stillness of the man in the cot. The blizzard raged for 4 days. The world vanished beyond the small, parchment-covered window. It was a white, howling void. The confinement was absolute, pressing in on the 4 people in the small room. On the second day, the silence became too much to bear. Silas was outside for a long time, clearing snow from the roof and a path to the woodpile. When he returned, shaking the snow from his heavy fur coat, Clara was kneading a small, poor dough made from his flour and water. He watched her for a moment. "Your man?" he asked, breaking the silence abruptly. Clara's hand stilled in the dough. She stared down at the sticky mass. "He is dead." Silas waited. She swallowed, her throat tight. "It was 3 weeks ago." She said nothing more, but the way she said it was everything. Her voice was not filled with the clean pain of grief. It was thick with something else. Shame. Her shoulders curled inward, as if expecting a blow. She did not say how he died. She did not say she wept for him. Silas took the information in, his expression unchanging. It confirmed what he already suspected from the bruises and the hunted look in her eyes. He merely grunted, took his axe, and went back outside to split wood. He did not ask her how. The days settled into a strange, silent routine. Silas was a man of profound habit. He rose before dawn, tended the fire, and went out to check his traps. He would return with a rabbit or two, skin them with practiced efficiency, and add them to the perpetual stew pot. He chopped wood. He mended a snowshoe. He sharpened his knife, and through it all, he remained almost entirely silent. But he observed. He missed nothing. He saw how Clara flinched when he moved too quickly near her. He saw how she portioned her own food, giving the largest shares to Tom and Eliza, taking barely enough to keep a bird alive for herself. He saw her rubbing her hands at night, wincing from the ache of the cold that had settled deep in her bones. And he heard her. The third night, long after the children were asleep, he lay awake in his cot, staring into the darkness. The wind had quieted to a low whistle, and then he heard it, a small sound, almost imperceptible. She was in the straw pile, her back to him, her body shaking in a silent, agonizing rhythm. She was crying, stuffing her face into the musty furs to muffle the sobs. It was the sound of a pain so deep it could not bear to be heard. It was a sound he recognized. It was the sound of his own guilt, the sound he swallowed every night thinking of the war, of his brother's face, of the men who died while he lived. The sound of it, coming from her, cracked something in the frozen wall he had built around himself. The next day, the change began. Eliza, warmed and fed for the first time in weeks, let out a small, bubbling laugh. Tom had found a piece of charcoal and was drawing on the hearthstone, and the sound of his sister's laughter made him grin. The sound was alien in the cabin. It was a sound of life, bright and sharp. Silas, who was cleaning his rifle, stopped. His hands went still. He looked at the children, his expression unreadable. The sound seemed to wake Clara from her fog. She looked at her children, truly looked at them, and saw the life returning to their faces. A fierce, protective resolve settled over her. She could not be a trembling guest. She had to earn their keep. She stood up. She swept the floor with a broom of bound twigs. She washed his few bowls in the pot with a rag and hot water. She found his meager supplies and, seeing the waste, began to cook properly, stretching the venison and flour, making a thin, savory gravy for the stew. She took his torn shirt, found her own small sewing kit in her satchel, and mended it. She worked without asking. She did not want charity. She was repaying a debt. Silas watched her. The cabin began to change. It smelled of baking bread. However poor, it smelled of soap, a woman's presence, which he had so actively avoided for 5 years, was suddenly everywhere. He found himself restless, awkward in his own home. He did not know what to do with the feeling. On the evening of the 5th day, Clara was moving the heavy iron stew pot from the fire hook. She was tired. Her hands, unaccustomed to the heavy work, were clumsy. The iron handle was hot, hotter than she expected through the rag she was using. She cried out, a sharp, sudden gasp of pain, and dropped the heavy ladle, spattering hot stew across the floor. She snatched her hand back, clutching it to her chest, her face white. Silas moved faster than she had ever seen him. In 2 long strides, he was across the room. He was not gentle, he was urgent. Here! He grabbed her by the good arm and pulled her to the water barrel. He seized her burned hand and plunged it deep into the icy water. Clara gasped again, this time from the shock of the cold. Hold it there, he commanded, his voice rough. She looked up at him, startled. His face, usually so impassive, was tight with something she could not name. He was not angry. He looked panicked. The sight of her pain had terrified him. She kept her hand in the water until the burning subsided to a dull, pounding ache. He pulled her hand from the barrel. The palm and the side of her fingers were a bright, angry red, already beginning to blister. He cursed, a low, sharp sound under his breath. He went to a small wooden chest in the corner, one she had not seen him open, and took out a small, dark tin. He returned to her. Give it here. She held out her trembling hand. He opened the tin. It was a dark salve that smelled of pine and herbs. He dipped his fingers into it. His hands were rough, calloused, the knuckles scarred. She expected his touch to be hard, like the rest of him, but it was not. He held her hand steady with one of his and, with the other, gently, almost reverently, spread the cool salve over the burned skin. His touch was so light it barely grazed her. He concentrated on the wound, his brow furrowed. Clara stood frozen, watching him. She watched the dark head bent over her hand. She watched the rough, scarred fingers moving with an impossible tenderness. When he was finished, he did not let go immediately. He held her hand for a moment longer, inspecting his work. Then, slowly, he looked up. Their eyes met. It was the first time, not the guarded glances of strangers, not the assessment of host and refugee. This was a man and a woman. His eyes, which she had thought were cold and dead, were a deep, clear gray, and they were filled with a profound, aching loneliness that she recognized. She saw him. He saw her. The silence in the cabin was no longer empty. It was charged, heavy, and full of 1,000 unspoken things, her bruises, his solitude, her fear, his gentleness. The moment stretched, long and painful, a raw connection forged in the quiet of the storm. He was the first to break it. He dropped her hand as if it, too, had burned him. He took a sharp breath and turned away, his broad back rigid. Be careful with it, he mumbled, and returned to his side of the room. That night, the tension was a new presence in the cabin. The storm had begun to die, the wind a low moan rather than a shriek. The children were asleep. Clara lay in the straw, her hand throbbing. She heard Silas move. He got up from his cot. He walked across the room, his bare feet silent on the wood floor. He stood over her for a moment. She kept her eyes closed, her heart pounding. He took a heavy bear pelt from a hook on the wall, one she had seen him use on his own bed on the coldest nights. He held it out, offering it to her. Clara opened her eyes. She looked at the dark, thick fur. Then she looked up at his face, silhouetted against the faint glow of the embers. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I am warm." It was pride. It was fear. To accept it felt like accepting something more, a debt she did not know how to repay, an intimacy she was not ready for. "You are cold," he stated. It was a fact. "I am fine. You will need it." He stood there for another long moment, the pelt held in his hand, his jaw tightened. He nodded. Once, a curt, angry motion. He turned, threw the pelt onto his own cot, and lay down. He did not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The small room was quiet again, but it was not the silence of his isolation. It was a new, shared silence. He could hear her breathing, the faint, shallow breaths of a person trying to take up no space at all. He could smell the pine salve on her skin. He could see her eyes when she had looked at him, full of fear and a startling, raw vulnerability. His lonely world, the one he had built for 5 years to keep the ghosts at bay, had been breached. This woman, with her hidden bruises and her silent tears, was here. And she was rattling the very foundations of his solitary life. The storm, it turned out, had only been resting. On the 6th morning, Clara awoke not to the pale gray light of a snowbound day, but to a howling, shrieking darkness. The wind had returned, driving a new, granular ice that struck the cabin walls like handfuls of thrown gravel. The world outside the parchment window was gone, replaced by a churning, angry white. Silas stood by the door, listening. He had been listening for an hour. "It is not a pass," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "It is a stop. This is a deep snow. It will hold." Clara, tending to the children by the fire, felt her stomach tighten. Her burned hand, wrapped in a clean rag, throbbed with the cold. "Hold for how long?" "Weeks," he said. He did not look at her. He looked at the door, as if assessing an enemy. "The high passes will be sealed until spring. We are here." The finality of it chilled her more than the draft coming from under the door. They were not guests. They were prisoners. She looked at the last, small sack of flour. She looked at the sliver of salted pork hanging from a rafter. She looked at her 2 children, whose faces had just regained a hint of color. Silas seemed untroubled. He merely accepted the new reality. He pulled on his heavy fur coat and boots, took his axe, and went out. He was gone for 3 hours. When he returned, he was covered in ice, his beard a frozen mask. He dragged several long, seasoned lengths of pine and birch inside, dropping them by the hearth. "What are you doing?" Tom asked, his voice small. Silas knelt by the wood, chipping the ice from it. "Working." He began to carve. For 2 days, as the blizzard screamed, the cabin was filled with the rhythmic scrape of his knife. He was splitting the birch into thin, flexible runners, lashing them to the pine cross-sections with strips of rawhide. He was making a sled. "Why?" Clara finally asked, driven mad by the silence and the endless wind. "Because the snow is too deep to walk with snowshoes, and we are low on salt," he said, not looking up. "And flour." Her breath caught. "You mean to go out in this? There is a cache, a trapper's cabin, 3 miles north, down in the ravine, old Jebediah. He did not come back last winter. His supplies will be there." He was not just carving a sled. He was carving their survival. He was provisioning, not for 1 man, but for 4. The realization struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. He had accepted them. The confinement forged a strange, unwilling intimacy. The small room was their entire world. She learned the rhythm of his breathing as he slept. He learned the sound of her humming, a low, nervous tune. As she mended the children's clothes, she found herself needing to fill the silence. The quiet that had existed between them after the night of her burn was heavier than the storm. "You have lived here a long time?" she asked one afternoon. While she was stirring a thin soup made of a single squirrel and water, he was testing the new runners, bending them with his full weight. He grunted. "Long enough. Is it not lonely?" She could not imagine it. The solitude, this crushing, endless white. He stopped. He looked at her, his gray eyes unblinking. "I came here for the quiet." It was a rebuff, polite but firm. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks and turned back to the fire. But later, she tried again. She was desperate to understand the man who held their lives in his hands, to see past the beard and the silence. "You know this land well," she said, patching a hole in Tom's trousers. "The traps, the weather. Were you born to it?" "No." He was sharpening his skinning knife on a whetstone. The sound was a rhythmic, metallic shing, shing, shing. "You were a trapper then, before?" "I have been many things. And now," she whispered, glancing at his broad back. He stopped the knife. He turned his head just enough to look at her from the corner of his eye. His gaze was not unkind, but it was absolute. It was a wall. "Now, I am here." Clara fell silent. She did not ask again, but she sensed the truth. His silence was not empty. It was full. It was a space occupied by something heavy, something he carried in the set of his shoulders and in the deep, tired lines around his eyes. It was a grief she recognized, a weight different from her own, but just as crushing. On the 8th day, the storm broke. The world outside was reborn, blindingly white, silent, and covered in a snow so deep it reached halfway up the cabin's single window. The sun, a pale disk, emerged, and the light was sharp enough to hurt. Silas spent the morning digging. He carved a deep trench from the door to the woodpile, his breath pluming in the still, freezing air. Clara watched from the doorway, her shawl pulled tight, the cold so sharp it felt like breathing glass. In the afternoon, he began to chop. The wood used during the storm needed to be replenished. It was heavy, slow work in the deep drift. He wore his heavy wool shirt and his fur cap, but after an hour, the labor warmed him. Clara was inside, trying to teach Tom his letters by drawing in the ash on the hearth. She glanced out the window, now clear of snow, and her hand stilled. He had taken off his shirt. She had seen her late husband, Arthur, undressed. Arthur had been a man of soft hands and fine vests, his body pale and narrow. Silas was not like that. He was built of the mountain itself. His back was a solid landscape of muscle. Pale skin stretched over ridges and valleys formed by a life of hard, physical labor. Steam rose from his damp shoulders in the frigid air. As he raised the heavy axe, the muscles in his back coiled, and as he brought it down, they released with a power that cleft the frozen logs in a single, clean stroke. He was simply chopping wood. It was a necessary, mundane task, but Clara watched. Her gaze lingered on the line of his spine, on the powerful curve of his shoulders, on the way the winter light caught the frost in his beard. A sudden, fierce heat rose up her neck, burning her face. It was a feeling so foreign, so unwelcome. It made her feel sick. Guilt, sharp and cold. Arthur was dead. Her husband was 3 weeks in the ground. 3 weeks. And she was standing here, safe in a stranger's cabin, feeling a forbidden, treacherous warmth spread through her limbs as she watched him work. She was what they said she was, a fallen woman, wicked. She turned from the window, her heart pounding a heavy, shameful rhythm. She grabbed the water bucket. "I am getting water," she said, her voice harsh. She fled the cabin, welcoming the searing cold on her hot face. The pain was a righteous penance. Night brought a new danger. The deep snows had driven the animals to desperation. Hunger made them bold. It began as a low sound, a distant, mournful harmony that Clara, drowsing by the fire, mistook for the wind rising again. Silas, who was lashing the last of the supplies to his new sled, froze. His head snapped up, his gaze fixed on the door. "What is it?" Clara whispered. "Get the children away from the window. Put them in the straw." His voice was calm, but it held a new, flat intensity. He moved to the wall and took down his rifle. A heavy, lever-action Winchester. He checked the load, his movements economical and sure. The howl came again. It was not distant. It was just outside the clearing. A chorus of high, hungry cries. "Wolves!" Clara breathed, her blood turning to ice. "A pack! A big one!" Silas said. "They smell us. They smell the meat." Clara scrambled to the children, waking them gently, herding them to the straw pile in the furthest corner. "Stay here. Be silent. Do not move. Do not make a sound." She covered them with every fur she could find. A shadow flickered past the window. Then another. A heavy thud struck the door, followed by a frantic, dry scratching. Silas moved to the heavy wooden shutter over the window, unlatching it and opening it a bare crack. He looked out for a long second, then closed it. His face, in the firelight, was grim. 10, he said. "Maybe more. They are testing the walls." Another thud, this time against the side of the cabin, making the tin cups rattle on the shelf. It was followed by a chorus of frenzied, high-pitched snarling. "They will not get in," Silas said, his voice level. "The logs are too thick, but they will try. We have to make them fear this place." He turned. He looked at her, his eyes assessing. Then he moved to the wall pegs and took down the other rifle. It was an older, heavier Spencer carbine, a relic of the war. He checked its load, then tossed it to her. Clara caught it. The cold, heavy weight of the oiled wood and steel was startlingly familiar. Silas stared. She had not fumbled. She had not cried out. She had caught it, and her hands had immediately, instinctively, found their proper place on the stock and forearm. "You know that rifle," he stated. It was not a question. "My father taught me," Clara said. Her voice was tight. All the fear burned away by a cold, sharp focus. "We lived in Kansas territory." He said a woman who could not shoot was a woman who would not live long. A new, profound respect lit his eyes. He nodded. "Once. Good." He pointed to the window. "You take the shutter. I will take the door. Do not fire at the shadows. Fire at them. We make them bleed. They will learn." He moved to the door, raised the heavy iron bar, and cracked it open no more than 2 inches. He braced it with his boot. He thrust the rifle barrel into the darkness. A gray shape was leaping at the door. He fired. The boom was deafening. It shook the cabin, and the smell of sulfur and burned powder instantly filled the air. A wolf screamed, a terrible high-pitched sound that was cut short. Clara was already at the window. She opened the shutter. 2 wolves were in the clearing, their eyes glowing green in the firelight. She raised the heavy Spencer, sighted down the barrel, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed the brass butt plate into her shoulder, a bruising, solid impact. But she held it. One of the wolves stumbled, recovered, and fled. They fired in a dreadful, rhythmic sequence. Silas, a boom from the door. Clara, a crack from the window. The cabin filled with smoke. The air outside was alive with snarling, yelping, and the sounds of the pack turning on its own wounded. After a full, terrible minute, Silas held up a hand. "Hold!" He slammed the door and dropped the bar. Clara shuttered the window. The cabin was plunged into a ringing silence, broken only by Eliza, who was now sobbing. A muffled, terrified sound from under the pile of furs. Silas stood listening. The barrel of his rifle pointed at the ceiling. The sounds outside had faded. There was a low growling, then silence. "They are gone," he said. "They will take their dead and they will not be back." He leaned his rifle against the wall. Clara leaned hers beside it. Her entire body was shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. The adrenaline drained from her, leaving her so weak she had to sit on the stool. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders trembling. Silas did not go back to his cot. He stoked the fire, adding logs until it roared. A bright, cheerful defiance against the dark. He looked at Clara, her head bent, her body shaking. "You did well, Clara," he said, his voice quiet. She nodded, unable to speak, and went to the children, pulling them from the straw and holding them close. They sat for a long time in the smoky, warm room, the near violence still vibrating in the air. "I have not seen a pack that bold in 2 years," Silas said, staring into the flames. He seemed to be speaking to himself. "The deep snow makes them hungry, and hunger makes them foolish." "Like men," Clara whispered, her voice raw. Silas looked at her. Her face was pale, streaked with soot, her eyes wide and haunted. The wall of his silence, the one he had guarded for 5 years, finally cracked. "I lost my brother in the war," he said. Clara's head came up. She stared at him. "He was younger than me," Silas said, his voice a low, rough monotone. "My kid brother, Caleb, he wanted to be a soldier, just like me. He signed up to follow me. I was his captain. I was supposed to keep him safe." He picked up a stick and poked at the fire, watching the embers shower upward. "We were at Shiloh, in the hornet's nest. I told him to hold a position. I told him to hold it. The Rebs overran us." He looked down at his hands. "I lived. He did not. His whole company. Gone. Wiped out." He had not said the name Caleb aloud in years. The confession left him feeling hollowed out, exposed. "I came out here after the surrender, 5 years ago. Seemed right. A place where there was nothing left to protect, nothing left to lose." He had laid his burden on the hearth between them. It was an offering, a piece of his soul, raw and bleeding. Clara watched him, her own grief rising to meet his. He had lost his brother to duty. She had lost her life to a lie. The shared danger, the scent of gunpowder, his sudden, shocking vulnerability. It broke her, too. "I fled," she said, her voice a thread of sound. He waited, his gaze fixed on her. "My husband, Arthur, his death. It was not natural." Silas did not move. He was found in his office. Clara whispered, the words tasting like poison. "He had been shot, but they found an empty bottle of laudanum by his glass. The sheriff, he said I poisoned him first, then shot him, to make it look like a robbery." "Did you?" Silas asked. His voice was not accusatory. It was flat. He just needed to know. "No." A single hot tear escaped and traced a clean path through the soot on her cheek. "He was a gambler. He owed dangerous men. They came to the house, but his family, his father, he runs the town. He hated me. He told the sheriff I was a whore, that I did it for Arthur's money." She choked on a sob. "They were coming to arrest me. I took the children, and the wagon, and I ran. I have been running ever since." Silas watched her. He took in her words. He weighed them against the bruises she had hidden. He weighed them against the steady way she had held the Spencer and fired into the darkness. He weighed them against the shame in her voice when she spoke of her husband. He did not pry. He did not ask for details, or why her father-in-law was so cruel. He did not need to. He had seen the world. He just nodded, a slow, final movement. He believed her, and in that moment, the way he watched her changed. The suspicion of the outsider, the wariness of the refugee, it all fell away. It was replaced by something else, something fierce. He looked at her not as a burden, but as something that had been hunted, something that had been wronged by the very world he had fled. A deep, protective reverence settled in his gaze. The days that followed were different. The shared confessions, the shared defense of the cabin had altered the air. It was no longer his cabin, and their shelter. It was our cabin. Thomas, who had watched Silas with a child's unfiltered awe, began to shadow him. "Sir," Tom asked. Silas was mending the sled harness, which had snapped in the cold. Silas grunted, unused to the formal address. "What is it, boy? Can I help?" Silas looked at the small, eager face. He hesitated, then handed him a piece of scrap leather. "Hold this. Pull. Tight." From then on, Tom called him Sir. "Sir, is the fire hot? Sir, did you see the snowfall on the roof?" Eliza, who was quieter, found her own way. Silas was sitting at the table, mending a tear in his moccasin. He sat, as he always did, with a hunter's absolute stillness. Eliza, holding her small corn-husk doll, toddled over to him. She stared at his beard, then at the long, graying hair he kept tied back with a leather thong. Clara tensed, ready to scoop her up. "Eliza, honey, leave him be." But Silas held up a large hand. "She is fine." Eliza reached out a tiny, hesitant hand and touched his hair. Silas froze. His entire body went rigid. He was a man unused to any touch, let alone the gentle, innocent, curious touch of a child. She began to play with it, humming a small, tuneless song, trying to braid a section with her clumsy fingers. Silas sat like a man carved from stone, his eyes wide, his expression one of profound and awkward shock, but he did not pull away. He let her do it. Clara watched, her throat tightening. He was moved. Under the years of ice and solitude, the man was deeply, painfully moved. The next day, Silas brought in several long, smooth poles of young aspen from his woodpile. He began lashing them together with strips of rawhide, building a frame. "What is that, sir?" Tom asked, squatting beside him. "A cot," Silas said, pulling a knot tight. Clara, who was washing their few clothes in a bucket by the fire, stopped. "Another one?" "For the boy," Silas said, not looking at her. "He is too big to be sleeping in the straw." Clara put the wet shirt down, a familiar prickle of shame rising in her. He was leaving on the sled tomorrow, a dangerous journey for them. And now he was spending his time building furniture. "You do not have to do that. We are already a burden. Taking your food, your time, taking you from your life." Silas stopped his work. He looked up at her, his gaze steady. The protective light she had seen after the wolf attack was still there, softer now. "You are not a burden." "Clara." He looked down at the lashing, then back at her, as if searching for a word he had not used in a long time. "You are something else. I just do not know what yet." He turned back to his work, leaving her to stand with his words hanging in the warm air. He was not just sheltering them, he was keeping them. That night, the new cot was finished. Tom was asleep in it, proud of his new bed. Silas had packed the sled. He would leave at first light. The children were asleep. The cabin was quiet, bathed in the low, orange glow of the fire. Clara was sitting on the stool, her knees drawn to her chest, watching the flames. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. "For the cot, for everything, for believing me." Silas, who had been checking the weather from the doorway, closed the door and barred it. He went to his small wooden chest, the one where he kept the salve, and took out a dark brown bottle and 2 tin cups. He uncorked the bottle and poured a small amount of whiskey into each cup. He held one out to her. "It will help the cold." Clara hesitated. A decent woman, a grieving widow, would not, but she was so tired and so cold, and the gesture was one of equality, not charity. She accepted the cup. Their fingers brushed as she took it. The small, brief shock of his skin against hers was as potent as the whiskey fumes. He did not go to his cot. He sat on the other stool, close to the fire. They sat in silence, drinking the harsh, burning liquid. It spread a slow, welcome warmth through her limbs, thawing a cold that was buried deep in her bones. They said nothing. His confession, her confession, the shared defense, the children, it all hung in the air between them, a new, complex reality. Clara felt the last of her strength, the brittle, sharp edges she had kept honed for weeks, finally begin to soften. The warmth of the fire, the slow burn of the whiskey, the solid, unmoving presence of the man beside her. It was too much. Her body, starved of comfort and safety, made a choice without her. She leaned. Her head came to rest, tentatively, on his shoulder. Silas went rigid. Every muscle in his body turned to iron. He was a fortress, and the walls were being breached. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her hair, feel the light, impossible weight of her head. He wanted to pull away. He wanted to wrap his arm around her. He did nothing. He sat, frozen, his hand gripping his tin cup so hard his knuckles ached. Clara did not seem to notice his stiffness. She was lost in the simple, profound relief of leaning on something that did not tremble. Her voice broke. It was a raw, fractured whisper, aimed not at him, but at the fire. I have not felt safe in years. She had not been safe when Arthur was alive, his rages and his debts a constant shadow. She had not been safe when he died, his family's accusations a promise of the gallows. She had not been safe on the trail, the cold and starvation her only companions. But here, in this remote cabin, trapped by a blizzard, with a bearded stranger who had killed men in a war and who had faced down wolves at his door, she was, for this one moment, safe. The confession was more intimate than any touch, more binding than any promise. Silas did not move. He did not speak. He did not comfort her. He simply sat, bearing her weight. He closed his eyes. The image of his brother's face, which had haunted him for 5 years, momentarily eclipsed by the feeling of the woman resting against him. The world he had built to keep the ghosts at bay was gone. She had replaced it. Silas returned from the trapper's cache with 2 sacks of flour, a small keg of salt pork, and a pouch of coffee beans. It was a bounty, but as he unpacked it, he knew it was not enough. The meager supplies of a dead man, meant for one, would not last 4 people through a mountain winter. The pork was already half gone, the flour dwindling with every loaf of bread Clara baked. By the end of the 3rd week, the salt was gone. The stew was flat and tasteless. The rabbits he caught in his snares were lean, barely enough to feed the children. "We need meat," he announced one gray morning, his voice scraping the quiet of the cabin. "A real kill, something that will last." He was checking the action on his Winchester, the brass cartridges glinting as he worked the lever. He pulled on his heavy fur coat. "I am coming with you," Clara said. She was by the fire, mending a tear in Eliza's dress. She did not look up, but her voice was firm. Silas stopped, his hand on the door latch. "No, you will stay with the children. They will be fine," she said, finally raising her head. Her eyes were clear, determined. "Tom is old enough to tend the fire for a morning. You need 2 people, one to shoot and one to watch your back. The wolves are still out there." He stared at her, ready to argue. The cold was brutal, the snow deep. It was no place for her. But he remembered the night of the attack. He remembered how she had caught the heavy Spencer, how she had stood at the window and fired without panic. "I can shoot, Silas," she said, reading his mind. "I told you, I will not be a mouth that only eats. I will earn our keep." His hesitation was brief. He looked at her, at the quiet strength that had returned to her face now that she was fed and warm. She was no longer the waif who had collapsed on his doorstep. She was a woman. He grunted. He crossed the room and took the Spencer carbine from its pegs. He did not toss it this time. He handed it to her. "But first, keep it quiet. The boy knows not to touch them, but he is still a boy." She took the rifle, the weight familiar and reassuring. She gave Tom solemn instructions, charging him with the care of his sister and the fire, a duty he accepted with a puff of his small chest. They left at first light, 2 dark figures moving into a silent, white world. Silas moved like a ghost. He wore the snowshoes he had mended, gliding over the deep drifts, his head on a constant, slow swivel, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm. Clara, her own boots wrapped in rags for silence and grip, walked in his exact footsteps, mimicking his movements. She was impressed. He seemed to be a part of the landscape, reading the dip of the snow, the broken twigs, the faint, frozen tracks she could barely see. She kept up. The air was thin and bit at her lungs, but her body was stronger now. She did not stumble. She did not make a sound. He stopped, holding up a gloved hand. He pointed, not with his finger, but with his chin. Clara squinted. Far off, in a small clearing where the wind had blown the snow thin, she saw it, a cow elk, its coat a thick, wintry gray. It was pawing at the frozen ground, digging for lichen. Silas unslung his Winchester. He looked at the distance. It was a long shot, nearly 200 yards. He glanced at Clara. He gestured to the Spencer. "The carbine is not sure at this range." He held out his own rifle. "You take it." Clara's breath caught. He was giving her the shot. He was trusting her with their food, with his better weapon. She shook her head, pointing at him. It's your rifle. Take it, he insisted, his voice a low rasp. I have watched you. Your hands are steady. Slowly, she traded him. The Winchester was heavier, longer, perfectly balanced. She knelt, resting the barrel on the thick bough of a pine, just as her father had taught her. She sighted down the long barrel. The elk's broadside filled the small iron notch. She let out her breath, slowly, finding the stillness. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The elk lifted its head, its large, dark eyes seeming to look right at her. It was a beautiful, powerful, living thing. She saw its breath plume in the frozen air. And she thought of Arthur, his body in the office. She thought of the blood. She thought of the sudden, ugly finality of death. Her hand trembled, a fine, betraying shake. The elk tensed. It had caught their scent. In another second, it would be gone. Boom! The sound of Silas's shot from the Spencer, right next to her ear, made her jump. The elk stumbled, fell to its knees, and then collapsed onto its side, a dark stain spreading on the snow. Silas was already moving, running low through the snow, his knife in his hand. Clara stood up, her legs weak. She was shaking, not from the cold. She had failed. She had hesitated. By the time she reached the clearing, Silas was already at work, his back to her, his movements swift and practiced. The animal was dead. He did not look up as she approached. He just worked. You had the shot, he said, his voice flat. I know. Her voice was a small, shamed whisper. I saw it. I could not. He finished his cut, then finally looked at her. Her face was pale, her eyes haunted. He saw the self-loathing in them. He had seen men break after their first kill. He had seen this look before. He rose, wiping his bloody hands on the snow. He walked over to her. She still held his rifle, her hands clenched white on the stock. He reached out and placed his large, warm, bloody hand over hers, steadying her, steadying the rifle. It's okay, he said, his voice quiet. The work is harder than the kill, but the kill, it costs something. It is okay. She looked at him, gratitude and confusion warring in her eyes. He had not shamed her. He had understood. He took his rifle from her. Now, we have work to do if we mean to eat. The work was brutal, intimate, and bloody. But Clara did not flinch. She held the legs. She helped him roll the heavy carcass. She learned to use the skinning knife, her hands, clumsy at first, growing more steady under his quiet instruction. The killing had been a moral crisis. The butchering was just labor. They dragged the heavy, quartered sections back to the cabin on the small sled. A grueling, 3-hour journey. They arrived exhausted, covered in sweat and blood, but victorious. Tom and Eliza met them at the door, their eyes wide at the sheer volume of meat. That night, they feasted. Silas fried fresh liver and heart in the last of the pork fat. The taste was rich, metallic, and life-giving. The children ate until their bellies were round and fell asleep by the fire, smiling. Later, after the cabin was quiet, Clara and Silas sat by the fire, the tension of the hunt gone, replaced by the deep, shared satisfaction of a full larder. Clara stared into the flames. The day's events, the shared hunt, her failure, his understanding, had broken down another wall. He was so deep in it. Silas, she said, her voice so low he had to lean forward to hear her. My husband. Silas said nothing. He just waited, his hands resting on his knees. The gambling, she continued, the words spilling out, as if she could no longer hold them. It was not just cards. It was bigger. There were men. They would come to the house, late at night. Men with cold eyes and fine suits, who never smiled. Arthur would be terrified. He would lock himself in his study. She shuddered. Then he would be angry, at me, at the children. She paused, remembering the bruises she had hidden, When he died, it was a terrible, terrible thing to feel. But the first thing I felt was relief. She finally looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears, expecting judgment. His face was unreadable in the firelight. They said I poisoned his whiskey. They all whispered it, that I had a lover, that I wanted him dead. She shook her head, a small, violent motion. His father, Jedediah Dawson, he runs that town. He owns the bank, the sheriff, everyone. He never liked me. He said I was low-born, from a dirt-poor Kansas family. He told everyone I married Arthur for his money. She took a sharp, ragged breath. He accused me of theft, after Arthur's body was found. Jedediah told the marshal I knew where the money was, that I had stolen it. What money? Silas asked, his voice a low rumble. The money Arthur owed? Or maybe money he stole? I do not know. Jedediah said I took it. He said that was why I killed him, that I poisoned him and shot him to cover it up. She leaned forward, her eyes desperate. I do not know where any money is. I swear to you, I took nothing. I just ran. She stopped. The silence drew out. But I did hide something, she whispered, the confession tearing from her. Not money, letters, Arthur. He was a fool, but he wrote things down. He kept a journal, letters. I found them, hidden in a loose board in his desk. I found them after I was so scared. I took them. I put them in my satchel. I have not even read them all. I was afraid to. Silas listened. He did not move, but his jaw clenched, the muscle tightening into a hard knot. He had seen men like Jedediah Dawson, men who owned towns, who owned people, who twisted the truth until it became a weapon. He had seen the world prey on the weak, on those like Clara, who had no one to stand for them. He did not say, I believe you. He did not need to. The quiet, burning anger in his eyes was for her. He just nodded. Once, his face grim. They are fools, he said. The confession settled between them. The last secret laid bare. The cabin, which had once felt spare and empty, was now too small. It was filled with their shared histories, their shared dangers, and a new, unspoken awareness that thrummed in the air between them. A simple act became charged. He passed her a log for the fire, and their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt through both of them. They pulled back as if burned. She sat mending his shirt, the one torn on the hunt. She felt his gaze. She looked up and found him watching her. He was not looking at her hands. He was looking at her face, his gaze heavy, tracing the line of her throat, the curve of her mouth. He did not look away. Clara's face burned, and she dropped her eyes to her sewing, her heart hammering a fast, unsteady rhythm. The silences were the worst. They would sit in the evening, the children asleep, the fire crackling. They no longer needed to talk, but the quiet was alive. It was full of the night she had leaned on his shoulder. It was full of the hunt. It was full of her secrets. It was full of what they both now knew. He found himself watching her constantly. The way the firelight caught the red strands in her brown hair, the quiet, efficient strength in her hands as she kneaded dough for their bread. The fierce, almost animal-like love in her eyes when she held Eliza. She found herself watching him, the way he moved with such absolute, quiet power. The unexpected gentleness in his large, scarred hands as he carved a small wooden bird for Eliza. The profound, aching loneliness that settled in his eyes when he stood by the window, staring out at the snow, thinking she was not looking. It had been weeks since she had truly been clean. The grime of the trail, the blood of the hunt, the smoke of the cabin. It was a second skin. One night, after the children were sound asleep, she began to heat water, pot after pot, melting snow. She filled the large tin washtub that Silas used for laundry. The cabin grew thick with steam. She turned to Silas. He was on his cot, his back to her, running a cloth over his rifle, pretending to be busy. I need to bathe, she said. Her voice was small, uncertain. Go on, he said, his voice rough. He did not turn around. "I will keep my back." She hesitated. The cabin was one room. There was no privacy, but the need for the hot water was an ache. She turned her back to him and began to undress. Her clothes were stiff with dirt. She dropped them in a pile, her fingers clumsy. The warm, steam-filled air touched her bare skin. She shivered. She stepped into the tub. The heat was a miracle, a shock of pure, agonizing pleasure. She let out a small sigh, sinking into the water, letting it cover her shoulders. She scrubbed her skin, her hair, washing away weeks of grime and fear and grief. She felt herself, her own body, emerging from under the dirt. She soaked, her head leaned back until the water began to cool. The fire crackled. The children breathed softly. Silas had not moved. He was absolutely still. She stood up, water streaming from her. She was naked in the firelight. The room was silent. She knew he was awake. She could feel his awareness on her skin, a tangible, prickling heat. Her clean shift lay on the stool. She reached for it, and she paused. For 1 second. 2. A hesitation that came from a place she did not recognize. A place that was not the shamed widow, not the terrified refugee, a place that was just a woman, alive. In the dead quiet, she heard a sound, a tiny, sharp intake of air. He had looked. She turned her head. He was already facing away again, his shoulders rigid, his head bent over the rifle as if in prayer. But he had looked. Her face, her neck, her entire body burned. She snatched the shift, pulling the clean, coarse cotton over her head, her hands trembling. She quickly dried her hair with a rag and hurried to her straw bed. She lay in the straw, but sleep was an ocean away. Her skin was clean, tingling from the hot water, from his gaze. She was warm. She was safe, and she was full of a fierce, desperate, and terrifying longing. It was not just for a man. It was for life, for a human touch that was not a blow, for a connection that was not based on fear or debt. She heard him shift in his cot. He was not asleep. The air between them was a taut, humming wire. An hour passed. The fire burned down to a red, pulsing heart. She could not bear it. The loneliness, the cold, the memory of her husband's cruel hands and his father's cold eyes. She rose from the straw, a pale ghost in her white shift. She moved across the small, shadowed space. She stopped by his cot. He was lying on his back, his eyes open, watching her. He had been waiting. "I can't sleep," she whispered. It was the plainest, most honest truth she had ever spoken. He said nothing. He just watched her, his face a map of shadows, the conflict in his eyes so deep it looked like pain. She stood there, trembling, waiting for him to send her away, to shame her. He shifted. With a slow, deliberate movement, he rolled onto his side, turning his back to her, moving to the far edge of the cot. He had made space. It was not an invitation. It was a surrender. Her breath hitched. She lay down beside him, on top of the furs. The cot was impossibly narrow. Her back was pressed against the solid, unyielding wall of his. His body was a furnace. She began to tremble, a fine, violent tremor that shook her from head to toe. He felt it. He felt the tremor, the cold, the fear. He rolled onto his back. She hesitated, then turned to face him. They were inches apart. She could see the deep war in his eyes. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, pained rasp. He thought he knew what this was. "You don't have to do this." He thought this was payment, a debt for the food, for the shelter. She looked at him. Her eyes were not full of fear or shame. They were full of a desperate, painful honesty. "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. I do not want to be afraid anymore. I do not want to be ashamed." She took a breath. I want to feel like I'm still alive." That broke him. The wall of his penance, his 5 years of solitude. It shattered. He raised a hand. His calloused, scarred fingers were shaking. He touched her face, his touch as tentative as a prayer, tracing the line of her jaw. He leaned in. They kissed. It was slow, tentative. It was not a kiss of passion, at first, but of pure, stunned discovery. It was the taste of wood smoke and coffee and the salt of his skin. It was the rough, startling graze of his beard against her face. A small sound tore from her throat, a sob or a sigh, and her hand came up to grip his shirt. That sound destroyed his control. The tentativeness vanished, replaced by a sudden, fierce longing, a hunger. This was not a man and a woman. This was two people, starved of touch, of comfort, of life, finding it in the darkness. His arm came around her, pulling her against his hard body. The kiss deepened, became raw, hungry, and desperate. It was 5 years of profound loneliness for him. It was a lifetime of fear for her. It all poured into the kiss. He was heavy, powerful. He shifted, moving over her, his other hand tangling in her still damp hair, cupping the back of her head. He was lost. She was lost. And then, just as suddenly, he stopped. He pulled back, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps. He rested his forehead against hers. He was trembling. He looked into her eyes. He saw her. The woman, not the victim. The strong, brave, terrified woman who had fired a rifle and bathed in his tub and confessed her secrets. No, he whispered. The word was torn from him. He pulled away, rolling off her, sitting up on the edge of the cot. He buried his face in his hands. She lay there, stunned, cold, her body aching with a rejection that was worse than any insult. Silas, he ran his hands through his hair, his back rigid. You deserve more than this. More than what? She whispered, the sting of shame bringing tears to her eyes. He turned to look at her. His face was a mask of agony, of a deep, agonizing tenderness she did not understand. More than a roll in a cot with a broken man, in a cabin you are trapped in. More than this. He gestured to the room, to the snow, to himself. Hiding, frightened. You deserve a home. You deserve a good man. A real life. Not this. He stood, grabbed his heaviest fur, and moved to the other side of the cabin. He sat on the stool by the cold hearth, his back to her, and wrapped the fur around his shoulders. He would not sleep. He would watch. The morning came, gray and heavy. Clara awoke in the straw. She had, at some point, returned to her own bed, though she did not remember it. The shame was a physical weight, cold and heavy in her stomach. Silas was already at the fire. It was lit, coffee was boiling. The children woke. Tom, Eliza. The cabin filled with their small, innocent sounds, their chatter. The silence between Silas and Clara was absolute. It was a thick, heavy blanket smothering the room. Neither spoke of it. Neither could look at the other. She rose, her movements stiff, and tended to the children, her face averted. He poured her a tin cup of coffee. He held it out to her. His hand was steady. He did not meet her eyes. Thank you, she murmured, her gaze fixed on the dark liquid. It is cold again, he said. His voice was flat, normal. Everything was the same. The routine of the cabin, the children, the endless white snow. But everything had changed. The air was no longer charged with unspoken tension. It was now charged with a shared, undeniable, and rejected intimacy. A warmth, a new, strange, and impossible warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It was the warmth of what had happened. It was the warmth of his kiss, and, most powerfully, it was the warmth of his refusal. He had not taken what she had offered in her desperation. He had, in his own rough way, honored her. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It was full, and it was impossible to ignore. The quiet that had settled after their failed embrace was a new, brittle thing. It was not the silence of strangers, nor the companionable silence of work. It was a silence of profound, unspoken acknowledgement. They lived around the event, their movements careful, their voices softer, their glances brief and heavy with meaning. Silas had, in his own harsh way, given her a gift of respect. He had seen her desperation and refused to take advantage of it. And Clara, after the initial sting of rejection had faded, felt not shame, but a deep, confusing, and powerful gratitude. The days passed, settling into this new, strange domesticity. The children were the bridge, their laughter, their simple needs, their complete unawareness of the tension that thrummed beneath the surface, forced Clara and Silas into a semblance of normalcy. They were a family, in all but name, and the pretense was beginning to wear thin. Then, one morning, Silas saw it. He was outside, splitting the last of the elk ribs. The snow-muffled thwack of his hatchet the only sound in the frozen air. He stopped, mid-swing. He did not turn his head. He did not tense. He simply went still. His stillness was more alarming than any sudden movement. Clara, who had been watching him from the doorway, felt her heart stop. "What is it?" "Inside," he said, his voice a low, flat command. "Take the children. Stay away from the window. Do not make a sound until I return." "Silas, what did you see?" she whispered, her hand flying to her throat. "Inside. Now." She did not argue. She herded Tom and Eliza back into the cabin's dim interior, her heart pounding a sick, familiar rhythm. She barred the door. Silas did not go back to his work. He grabbed his Winchester from where it leaned against the cabin wall and melted into the trees, moving uphill, parallel to the high ridge that overlooked the valley. He moved like a shadow, a gray shape against the snow, his snowshoes making almost no sound. He saw the rider clearly from his vantage point, a single man on a tired-looking sorrel, picking his way slowly along the frozen creek bed far below. He was not a trapper. His clothes were too new, his rifle a townman's rifle, shiny and clean. He was a scout. He was searching. Silas watched him for an hour. The man made a cold camp down by the water, his fire small and smoky. He seemed restless. He studied the ridges, his gaze passing over the hidden cleft in the rock where Silas's cabin was nestled. But seeing nothing. The cabin was invisible from the valley floor. After eating, the man mounted up and rode on, heading west, following the only passable route. Silas did not return to the cabin. He waited. He waited for another 2 hours, motionless in the freezing cold, until he was certain the man was alone. Then he moved. He did not go to the cabin. He went down, slipping and sliding down the steep wooded incline to the valley floor, to the place where the rider had camped. The fire was a smoking circle of black sticks. The man had left little, but he had left something. It was caught on a low-hanging branch of willow, snagged from his pocket or his saddlebag as he'd passed. It was a piece of paper, folded and damp, already stiffening in the cold. Silas plucked it from the branch. He unfolded it. It was a bounty notice, printed in heavy, black letters, weathered by travel, stained with water and mud. But the words were clear. Wanted. $100 reward. Below the words was a crude woodcut drawing, a generic woman's face. It looked nothing like her, but the name, printed below, struck him like a physical blow. Clara Dawson. For question of murder and theft, it named the town, the county, and the man to whom she was to be delivered, Jedediah Dawson. Silas stood for a long time, the paper in his hand, the quiet valley, the silent trees, the cold air, it all receded. All he could hear was the blood pounding in his ears. This was not a rumor. This was not a woman's fear. This was a piece of paper that gave any man with a gun the right to hunt her. $100. A fortune. Enough to make a man risk the high passes in winter. He returned to the cabin at dusk. The single window glowed with the warm, orange light of the hearth. He saw the silhouettes of the children, and of Clara, pacing. He had been gone all day. She heard his step on the porch and flung the bar back, the door scraping open. "Silas, you are safe! I was so—" She stopped. His face was a mask. He was caked in snow, his beard frosted with ice, but it was his eyes that stopped her. They were as cold and gray as the granite cliffs. He held his rifle in one hand. In the other, he held the paper. He stepped inside, pushing the door shut behind him. The small, warm room was suddenly suffocating. Tom and Eliza, sensing the new, terrible tension, scrambled into the straw bed and went silent. Clara's gaze was fixed on the paper. She knew, with a dreadful, final certainty, what it was. "Silas," she whispered. He did not speak. He just held it out to her. She took it. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely read the words she already knew were there. Murder, theft, Jedediah Dawson. She let out a sound, a small, choked sob, and the paper fell from her fingers to the floor. "You said he was a gambler," Silas said. His voice was not angry. It was worse. It was hollow. "Dead. You said your father-in-law hated you." "He does," she whispered, backing away from him until she hit the cold cabin wall. "You did not tell me about the gold," he said. It was not a question. Clara broke. The strength she had gathered, the poise, the will to survive, it all shattered. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the racking. Silent sobs she had held back for weeks. "There is no gold," she cried, her voice muffled. "I told you." "I do not know about any gold. I do not have it." He watched her, his face impassive, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. He wanted to believe her. He wanted, more than his next breath, to believe her. But he had seen what the promise of gold did to men, and he had seen this rider. "Then why are they hunting you?" he asked, his voice rough. $100. They are not hunting you for your father-in-law's spite. "Clara, they are hunting you for money." "Because they think I know?" she screamed, her head snapping up. Her face was a ruin of tears and terror. "That is what I tried to tell you. Arthur, he did not just owe money. He stole it." She scrambled to her feet, running to the small, worn satchel that held the few things she had saved from her old life. She tore it open, her hands shaking, and pulled out the small, oilcloth-wrapped packet of letters. "He stole it," she said, her voice cracking. "From them, the men in the fine suits. He stole it from them. And Jedediah. Jedediah thinks Arthur hid it. And he thinks Arthur told me where." She was sobbing openly now, the words torn from her. "But he did not. He told me nothing. He just died, and he left me with this. He left me with them, and his father, and the whispers, and this." She threw the packet of letters at his feet. Silas looked down at the letters. He looked at her, her entire body trembling, her eyes wide with a desperate, animal-like terror. He saw the truth. It was not the guile of a thief. It was the pure, unadulterated panic of the hunted. He had seen this look before, too, on the faces of young recruits who had broken, on the faces of men about to die. He had been a fool. He had let the world in, and this was the cost. He bent down. He did not pick up the letters. He picked up the bounty notice. Clara watched him, her breath catching in her throat. He held the paper. He looked at her, his gaze steady, the coldness gone, replaced by a slow, burning fire. He turned and, with a calm, deliberate movement, he unfolded the paper and dropped it into the heart of the fire. They watched it curl. The black letters "Wanted" flared up, turned to orange light, and dissolved into gray ash. Silas turned back to her. He stepped forward, closing the small space between them. He stood over her, a mountain of a man, blocking out the rest of the world. "You are safe here," he said. His voice was a raw, undeniable vow. "Let them come." That night, the cabin was a tomb of silent fear. The rider was out there, the world was out there, the paper was ash, but the threat was real, and it was riding the valley. Clara put the children to bed, but she could not rest. She sat on the stool by the fire, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the flames where the notice had burned. She was shaking. The cold had returned, a deep, internal ice that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold of the grave, the cold of the gallows. She began to cry. Not the silent, hidden sobs he had heard before. This was a breakdown, the terror of the day, the memory of her husband's betrayal, the dreadful, looming shadow of Jedediah Dawson. It all crested. She put her face in her hands and wept, a raw, ragged sound of a soul that had finally given up. Silas lay on his cot, listening. He had listened to her cry before and done nothing. He had refused her touch. He had kept his distance. He could not do it now. He rose from the cot. He did not pause. He did not hesitate. He crossed the small room and knelt before her. She flinched, looking up, her face blurred with tears. He did not speak. He just reached out, his large, rough hands cupping her shoulders, and pulled her from the stool. He pulled her into his arms, against his chest, and just held her. Clara's body was rigid with shock for a moment, and then she collapsed against him, her hands grabbing his shirt, her face pressed into the coarse wool. She wept. She wept for her lost life, for her dead, cruel husband, for her terrified children, for the fact that she was here, in the arms of a stranger, her last, only hope. He held her. He let her cry until the sobs subsided into shuddering, exhausted breaths. He held her with a strength that was not possessive, but absolute. It was the strength of a fortress wall, a strength that said, "They will not pass." He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her the few steps to his cot and lay her down on the furs. He lay down beside her, pulling the heavy bear pelt over both of them, and gathered her close. This was not the night before. This was not the desperate, fumbling need of two lonely people. There was no fear. There was no hesitation. She turned in his arms to face him. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers in the dim, glowing light of the embers. He saw her, all of her, the fear, the strength, the woman. "I am so scared," she whispered. "I know," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "You do not have to be, not anymore." He kissed her. It was not the hungry, frantic kiss of their first attempt. It was slow. It was tender. It was a promise. It was a claiming. She kissed him back, a deep, shuddering release of all the tension, all the fear. Her hands, which had been clutching his shirt, moved up, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. This was not a mistake. This was not a payment. This was a choice. His hands moved over her, learning the shape of her under the thin cotton shift. He touched her as if she were something precious, something he had found and would not lose. But his touch was also hungry. The 5 years of his self-imposed exile, the 5 years of penance and solitude were over. He was a man, and she was a woman, and they were alive in a world that wanted them both dead. He was gentle, but his gentleness had a core of iron. He was claiming her, and she was, in every way, surrendering. But it was not a defeat. It was a homecoming. Later, as they lay tangled in the furs, her head resting on his chest, his breathing slow and even beneath her ear, she felt a profound stillness. The fear was gone. The ice was gone. She was warm. She was safe. She was drifting into the first truly deep sleep she had known in months when she heard him speak, his voice a low, rough whisper against her hair. "I do not want you to leave," he said. The confession seemed torn from him. "Not ever." Clara lifted her head. She looked at him. His eyes were open, watching her, his expression raw, vulnerable. She touched his face, her fingers tracing the rough line of his beard. "I am done running," she whispered. I do not want to run anymore. I want to build something here." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. He said nothing. He just pulled her closer, his arm a heavy, possessive bar across her waist, and closed his eyes. The morning after was not silent. It was soft. The heavy, brittle tension was gone, replaced by a new, warm ease. They moved around each other with a new, shared knowledge. He poured her coffee. She passed him bread. Their fingers brushed. This time, neither pulled away. Later that day, Silas went to his woodpile. He did not select logs for the fire. He selected a piece of clean, smooth aspen. He brought it inside, and with his sharpest knife, he began to work. "What is that, sir?" Tom asked, squatting beside him. Silas ran his hand over the wood. "It is a cradle," he said, his voice quiet. Clara, who was washing the children's clothes, froze. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. For Eliza, Silas continued, not looking at her. She is too big for the straw. Clara watched him, her heart swelling with an emotion so fierce it hurt to breathe. He was not just offering her safety for a night. He was offering her a life. He was carving a piece of furniture that spoke of babies, of permanence, of a future. The work of the cabin became the work of a family. Silas took Tom out, not to hunt, but to teach. He showed him how to read the tracks in the snow. He showed him how to build a snare, how to find the places where the rabbits ran. You must be quiet, boy, Silas instructed, his large hand resting on Tom's small shoulder. You must be part of the quiet. The woods will tell you everything, if you just learn to listen. Tom, his face serious, nodded, his adoration for the big man palpable. He was not just a boy hiding. He was a boy learning. He was a boy with a father. Clara watched them from the cabin, her hand pressed to her mouth, and for the first time since Arthur's death, her tears were not of fear or grief, but of a sharp, painful, and unbelievable joy. The winter held, the deep snows, which had been their prison, were now their fortress. No riders could pass, no threat could reach them. They lived in their high, hidden pocket of the world, and they were, for a few short months, completely and utterly happy. Then, the thaw began. It started not as a rush, but as a sound, a drip, drip, drip from the eaves. The snow on the roof grew heavy, wet, and slid off in great groaning sheets. The high, white world began to show its bones, brown earth, dark rock, and bright, sharp green of new pine buds. The creek in the valley, which had been a ribbon of ice, began to roar. Spring. It was life. It was renewal. And it was danger. The pass will be open in a week, Silas said one evening. He stood at the open door, smelling the air. It was no longer sharp and cold. It was soft, damp, and full of the scent of wet earth and pine. Clara felt the old, cold dread return. The open pass meant the world could get in, and 2 days later, it did. Silas saw them first. He was on the ridge, checking his snares. He saw them not as a threat, but as movement. 3 riders, far below, dots of black against the new, muddy green of the valley floor. They were moving slowly, the same way the scout had. They were searching. They stopped where the scout had camped, conferred, and then one of them pointed up toward the ridges, up toward the hidden places. Silas was not in the cabin. He was a mile away. He ran. He did not use the snowshoes. He crashed through the rotting snow and mud, running with a desperate, lung-bursting speed. He burst into the clearing, his chest heaving. Clara was outside, hanging blankets to air in the spring sun. "Get them!" "Now!" he panted, grabbing his rifle and a bag he had always kept packed by the door. "They are here." "Who?" "The men. They are in the valley. They are coming." There was no time for terror. She grabbed Tom and Eliza, who was crying at the sudden panic. "We cannot stay here. They will see the smoke. They will find it." He grabbed her arm, pulling her. "This way. Hurry!" He did not lead them up the mountain. He led them down, into a thick, dark stand of pine, to a place where the earth fell away, a small ravine hidden by boulders. He pulled back a heavy curtain of old, dead pine boughs. Behind it was a dark opening. "In here," he said. It was a dugout, an old trapper's hidey hole, or perhaps a bear's den. It was small, damp, and smelled of cold earth and animals. "Stay here, no matter what you hear. Do not come out. Do not make a sound." "What are you going to do?" she whispered, clutching Eliza. "I am going to watch," he said, his face grim. He handed her the Spencer carbine. "If I do not come back by dark, you take the children, you head east, you follow the creek down. You will hit a mining town in 2 days. You understand?" "Silas, no, do not leave us." "They are hunting you," he said, his voice harsh. "They will not find you here. I am just a trapper, I will go back to the cabin. I will meet them. I will send them on their way." He kissed her. A hard, fast, desperate kiss. "Stay. Silent." He was gone. Clara huddled in the dark. Cold hole. Eliza in her lap. Tom pressed against her side. She held the heavy rifle, her heart a cold stone. She sat there for an eternity. An hour. 2. She heard them. Voices. Men. They were on the ridge above. They were loud, their voices carrying on the clear spring air. "This is a fool's errand. Jed," one voice said. "She ain't up here. She's long gone to California." "She is here," another voice said. A voice that was cold, hard, and terrifyingly familiar. Jedediah. Her father-in-law. "That worthless scout I sent said he found a fresh track. Someone is living up here. And where there are people, there is my gold." Clara's blood ran cold. He was here, not bounty hunters. Him. She heard them move off, their voices fading. They were moving toward the cabin, toward Silas. The hours dragged. The dugout grew colder. Eliza whimpered. Tom sat, pale and silent, his eyes wide. Clara's mind raced. Jedediah. He was here. He would not be fooled by a simple trapper. He would see Silas, and he would see a man protecting something. He would not leave. She had to know. She had to know what Arthur had done. Her satchel was in the dugout with her. It was the one thing Silas had grabbed. She fumbled in the damp darkness, her hands finding the oilcloth packet of letters. She had been too afraid to read them. Now, she was too afraid not to. She moved to the tiny sliver of light at the dugout's entrance. Her hands were shaking. She pulled out the first letter. It was Arthur's hand, a looping, elegant script. "My dearest." It began. It was not to her. She read, her stomach hollowing out. It was a love letter to another woman. A woman in San Francisco. She tore through the others. They were not a journal. They were letters, plans. Jedediah is a fool. He thinks the money is in the bank. He does not know I have taken the cash from the assay office. 20,000 in gold. It is done. I have it. I have to wait. Clara suspects nothing. She is a dull, pious creature. She will be fine. Her family is gone. She has nowhere to turn. Jedediah will take care of her, if only to save his precious family name. I cannot bear it. Jedediah knows. The men I took it from, they know. They are here. I will have to. The last letter was dated the day before he died. They will kill me. I know it. I have hidden the gold. I cannot get to it. I will write a map. I will send it to you. If I am not in San Francisco in 2 months. It is yours. Do not look for me, and do not ever believe a word anyone says about Clara. She is a good woman. I have destroyed her. I am a coward. Clara stared at the last page. He had not shot himself. He had been murdered. He had not planned to leave her with the debt. He had planned to abandon her before it. And he had stolen the gold. He was a thief. He was an adulterer. He was a coward. And in his last, pitiful act, he had condemned her. He had left her, penniless, to face the men he stole from. And his father, who believed she had the key to his lost fortune. A cold, clean rage, purer than any emotion she had ever felt, burned away her fear. It burned away her grief. It burned away the last, lingering ghost of the woman she had been. She was not Arthur's shamed widow. She was just Clara. The sun was setting. The light in the dugout was failing. She heard a sound, a single, low whistle, the call of a mountain quail. It was Silas. She scrambled out of the hole, Tom and Eliza behind her. He was there, leaning against a pine, his face grim. "They are gone," he said, "for now." "Did they?" "They believed me. I am a trapper. I have been here for 5 years. I saw no one. They rode west, toward the next valley. But he..." Silas's jaw tightened. The old man, Jedediah. He was not convinced. He was looking at the cabin, at the chimney. "He knows. He knows," Clara said, her voice flat. "Dead. They will be back," Silas said. "Yes," Clara said. She held the letters in her hand. "But this time, we will be ready. That night, They did not hide. They sat at the table in the cabin, the door barred, the rifles on the table. They ate. They fed the children. They put them to bed. Then Clara stood. She took the packet of letters. She walked to the hearth. Silas watched her. She looked at him. He stole it. $20,000 in gold. He was running. To another woman. He was leaving us behind. With nothing. Silas's face did not change. He just nodded. Once, he had expected as much. Clara turned to the fire. One by one, she dropped the letters into the flames. She watched the ink curl. She watched the lies, the betrayal, and the last pitiful confession turn to ash. She was not burning her past. She was cleansing it. When the last letter was gone, she turned. Silas was standing right behind her. He had risen from the table, and he was watching her, his eyes filled with a new, dark intensity. The hunt was on. The enemy was real, and this woman, his woman, had just burned the last of her chains. He did not speak. He did not need to. He pulled her to him. He pulled her outside, into the cold, clear spring night. The stars were a brilliant, hard glitter in the black sky. He kissed her. It was not the tentative kiss of discovery. It was not the tender kiss of comfort. It was slow. It was intense. It was a kiss of equals, a kiss of partners, a kiss that sealed a vow of war. It was the raw, undeniable claiming of two people who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He lifted her, his hands strong and sure, and carried her back to the cot and under the stars. With the threat of death in the valley below, their union was finally and completely sealed. The dawn that followed their union brought no peace. The intimacy they had shared was not a soft thing. It was a forged weapon. The world was coming for them, and the night had been nothing more than the sharpening of an axe before the hard work of felling a tree. Silas rose from the cot, his movements stiff. The warmth of her body was still imprinted on his. He looked at her, asleep for a moment longer, her face clear of fear, and a fierce, brutal possessiveness settled in his gut. It was not the simple ownership of a man for a woman. It was the primal, territorial instinct of a man protecting his home. He did not wake her gently. He put his hand on her shoulder and shook her. "Clara, get up. We have work." She woke instantly, the fear snapping back into her eyes. "Are they here?" "No, not yet, but they will be. Today. Tomorrow. The valley is open." He began his preparations while she dressed. He was a different man. The quiet, solitary trapper was gone, replaced by the captain who had survived the hornet's nest. His eyes were cold, assessing, his movements economical. He was preparing for a siege. He took the heavy table and, with a grunt, upended it, shoving it against the cabin's single, parchment-covered window. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Barricade," he said, lashing it to the wall pegs with rawhide. "It will not stop a bullet, but it will spoil their aim. It leaves us 2 firing ports, the door and the chink in the logs by the hearth." "Us?" Clara said, stopping, her hands full of Tom's blanket. Silas paused. He looked at her. "I am taking you and the children to the dugout. You will take the Spencer, half the ammunition, and all the cured meat. You will stay there. If I do not come back in 2 days, you run east, like I told you." He turned back to his work. He was sentencing himself to die for them. Clara stood frozen for a beat. The woman who had stumbled into this cabin, the terrified, beaten widow, would have agreed. She would have taken her children and fled. She was not that woman. "No," she said. Silas did not turn around. "Do not argue with me, Clara. This is not a choice." "No," she said again, her voice harder, louder. It echoed in the small cabin. He finally turned. She was standing in the middle of the room, her chin up, her eyes blazing with the same cold rage she'd felt when she burned the letters. "I ran once," she said, her voice shaking but full of iron. "I ran from my husband's family. I ran from the town. I ran from the whispers. I will not run again. This is my home. You are. This is my life." I will not hide in a hole and wait for you to die for me." He stared at her, a long, profound silence stretching between them. He saw the woman who had fired the Spencer in the dark. He saw the woman who had faced him down. He saw the woman he had held in his arms as she wept. He gave a single, sharp nod. "All right, then you learn." The fortification became a shared, frantic labor. They moved the keg of water away from the door and into the safest corner. They brought in the last of the firewood and stacked it near the hearth, where it could be reached without crossing the open. He pulled up 2 of the floorboards, creating a small, shallow cellar where the children could lie, partially protected from stray bullets coming through the walls. "This is not a fort," he told her, his voice grim. "These logs will stop a pistol, but a rifle, fired straight on, will come through. Stay low. Never stand when you can crouch. Never crouch when you can lie." He took her outside, into the bright, cold spring air. It felt obscene, a mockery of the day's beauty. He set a pine cone on a stump, 50 yards distant. "Load the Spencer," he commanded. She fumbled with the cartridges, her hands clumsy with adrenaline. "Again," he said, his voice flat. "Do not hurry. Hurry gets you killed. Be smooth. Smooth is fast." She loaded it again, and again, until her fingers were raw and her movements were fluid. "Now, shoot the cone," he said. She raised the rifle. She aimed. She remembered the elk, the trembling. "You are not killing," he said, standing behind her, his voice low in her ear. "You are defending. You are not taking a life. You are protecting one. You are protecting Tom. You are protecting Eliza. See the cone. Do not see a man. See the threat. Squeeze. Do not pull." She breathed out. She squeezed. The rifle barked, slamming into her shoulder. The pine cone vanished in a spray of bark and wood. She turned to him, her eyes wide. A flicker of something, pride, respect, crossed his face. "Good. Again. Load. Fire. Load. Fire. Do not think. Just do." For an hour, she shot. She shot until her shoulder was a purple, aching bruise. She shot until the smell of gunpowder was in her hair, on her skin. She shot until the fear was replaced by a cold, sharp, mechanical focus. The hardest part was the children. Clara took them to the dugout, not as a drill, but as a game. She filled it with the furs, with Tom's small whittled toys, with Eliza's cradle. "This is a new game," she told them, her voice bright and false. "It is the silent game. When the bad men come, we are going to play it. We will come here, and you will lie flat in the furs, and you will not make a sound, not a whisper, not a cough. Can you do that for me?" Tom, who had seen Silas's face, who had heard the gunfire, knew it was not a game. He nodded, his small face pale and serious. "Like you, sir?" he asked Silas, who stood at the entrance. Silas put his large hand on the boy's head. "Aye, Tom, just like me, quiet as a shadow. And if we tell you to run, you grab your sister's hand. You do not stop. You do not look back. You run to the creek and you follow it down. You understand?" "Yes, sir," Tom whispered. Clara kissed them, a desperate, fierce kiss, and left them in the dugout. She and Silas returned to the cabin. The trap was set. They had done all they could. They waited. The silence of the cabin was a living, breathing thing, heavier than any storm. They came in the late afternoon. Silas saw them first, a flicker of movement through the trees. "They are here, 3 of them." He looked through the firing slit by the door. "The old man, Jedediah, and 2 others. One is the man you hit. Clara, his arm is in a sling. The other, he looks like a hired gun. Hard case." Clara moved to her position, the small chink in the logs by the hearth. Her heart was a cold, hard hammer in her chest. She could see them. They rode into the clearing, their horses nervous, sensing the tension. Jedediah Dawson was a tall man, thin as a rail, dressed in a black town suit, his face pinched and cruel. He reined in his horse a safe distance from the cabin. "Silas Ward!" Jedediah's voice was thin, but it carried. "I know you are in there, and I know you have her." Silas said nothing. He watched. "I am a patient man. Ward," Jedediah called. "But I'm also a rich one. I have a warrant for the woman, Clara Dawson, for murder, and I have 2 men here who are happy to earn their pay. Send her out, and I will let you live." Silas remained silent. He raised his Winchester. "He is lying," Clara whispered, her rifle shaking. "I know," Silas said. Jedediah's patience snapped. "He will not talk. Fine. Burn him out. Flank him. Ames." The man with the sling, the one Clara had wounded, dismounted and took cover behind a large boulder. The hard-cased man, Ames, spurred his horse into the trees on the left, trying to get to the cabin's blind side. Jedediah raised his own rifle and fired. The bullet thudded into the log wall, inches from Silas's head. "Now!" Silas roared. He fired. His shot was not at Jedediah. It was at his horse. The animal screamed, reared, and fell, pinning Jedediah's leg. "Clara! Left! The flanker!" Clara saw him. Ames. He was off his horse, running low, darting between the trees. He was heading for the side of the cabin, the wall with no window, no slit. If he got there, he could set the fire. He could shoot them from cover. She rested the Spencer on the log. She saw him. He was not a pine cone. He was a man. See the threat. Protect Tom. Protect Eliza. She breathed. She squeezed. The rifle kicked. The man, Ames, stumbled. He did not cry out. He just dropped his rifle, looked down at his chest in surprise, and fell face first into the mud. "He is down," Clara yelled, a wave of nausea and adrenaline washing over her. "Reload!" Silas yelled back. From behind the boulder, the wounded man was firing, his pistol shot snapping wildly. Jedediah, screaming in rage and pain, had untangled himself from his dead horse and was crawling toward the same boulder. "They are pinned," Silas said, breathing hard. He was watching the boulder. "They will wait. They will wait for dark. We cannot let them—" He looked at Clara. "Keep them busy. Fire at the rock. Make them keep their heads down." He began to move, crawling from the door to the side wall. "What are you doing?" she cried. "There is an old log hole," he said, "for ventilation. I'm going to get a better angle. Keep firing." Clara fired. The bullet sparked off the granite. The wounded man fired back. Silas was at the far wall, prying a small, chinked log from its place. He had a clear view of the boulder's left side. He raised his rifle. He waited. Clara fired again. The wounded man, impatient, foolish, peeked out from the right side, trying to get a shot at her. Silas did not move. He waited. Jedediah, from behind the rock, shouted, "He is flanking you! Watch the left!" It was a trick. The wounded man, hearing his boss's warning, instinctively moved left, exposing his head and shoulders around the side of the boulder, right into Silas's line of sight. Silas fired. The man's head snapped back. He was dead before he hit the ground. "Two down," Silas said. He turned from the wall, and in that moment, Jedediah, who was not a fool, fired. He had not been crawling. He had been waiting. He had anticipated Silas's move. The shot was high. It went through the thin, upper logs of the cabin wall. Silas gasped. It was not a cry of pain. It was a sharp, sudden intake of air. He stumbled, falling back from the wall. He looked down. A dark, plum-colored stain was spreading across his left side, high on his ribs. "Silas!" He fell to one knee, his rifle clattering to the floor. "I am hit!" he gasped, his face suddenly pale, slick with sweat. Clara ran to him. The world outside, Jedediah, the fight, it all vanished. There was only Silas, bleeding on her floor. "Get down," he grunted, trying to push her away. "He will fire again." "He is running," she cried, glancing through the slit. "He is on his horse, the flanker's horse. He is gone." She fell to her knees beside Silas. He was leaning against the wall, his eyes clenched shut in pain. How bad? She whispered. It is high. He breathed. It missed the gut, but it is bleeding. Get to the cot, she said, pulling his arm over her shoulder. He was a dead weight. She grunted with the effort, dragging him, his boots scraping the floor, away from the walls, away from the door, to the relative safety of his cot. He collapsed onto it, his breath coming in shallow, wet gasps. The children, he whispered. They are safe, she said. She ripped open his shirt. The wound was ugly, a dark, ragged hole. Bleeding freely, it had gone clean through. She ran to their supplies. She grabbed the whiskey. She tore a long strip from her own clean shift. This will hurt, she said, her voice shaking. Do it! She poured the raw alcohol into the wound. Silas screamed. It was a short, sharp sound, choked off in his throat. His whole body arched off the cot. She pressed the clean cloth to the wound, front and back, trying to staunch the bleeding. Her hands were covered in his blood. He was pale, his skin clammy. Silas, she said, her hands trembling so hard she could barely tie the bandage. Silas, look at me. His eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with pain. Do not you dare, she whispered, her voice breaking. Do not you dare leave me. I will not let you. Tears streamed down her face, dripping onto his bloody chest. She had fought, she had killed, and she was going to lose him. Silas, she sobbed, clutching his hand. I love you. Do you hear me? I love you. He looked at her. The fog in his eyes seemed to clear for just a moment. His fingers, weak, tightened on hers. His lips moved. It was not a sound. It was just a breath. Love you. His eyes closed. His hand went limp. No! She screamed. No! She heard a sound. A horse. Outside. Jedediah. He had not fled. He had circled. He had seen her victory. And he was coming back. He is back! She cried, her voice rising in hysteria. She looked at Silas. He was unconscious. She was alone. She heard Jedediah's voice, full of triumph. It is over, girl. Your man is dead. I heard him. Now, you have two choices. You can burn, or you can come out and tell me where my son hid my gold. A thud against the wall. A new smell. Lantern oil. I am giving you to the count of 3, he roared. 1. Clara stared at Silas's pale face. I love you. A cold, clear sanity cut through her panic. She could not fight him. He was one man, but she was one woman, and her only defender was dying. But Silas was a soldier. She remembered the fortification. She remembered him lashing a heavy log, one of the spare roofing timbers, just inside the doorway, above the frame. It was tied with a single, thick rope, the end looped around a peg on the wall. If they breached the door, he had grunted. Cut the rope. A deadfall. A trap. 2, Jedediah yelled. Clara moved. She grabbed the Spencer. She checked its load. She grabbed the heavy skinning knife from the table. She pressed it into Silas's limp hand. She ran to the door. I am coming, she screamed, her voice high and thin with false terror. I surrender. Do not shoot. I am alone. He is dead. She heard Jedediah laugh, a dry, cruel sound. Clever girl. Open the door. Slowly. She fumbled with the bar, making her hands shake, making her sob. She pulled the heavy bar back. The door swung open. Jedediah stood there, on the porch, his rifle leveled at her heart. He was grinning. Where is it? He hissed. The map, the letters. They are in my satchel, she whispered, pointing back into the dim cabin. By the hearth. He stared past her, into the shadows. He saw Silas, unmoving on the cot. He grinned again. Get it for me. No, Clara whispered, stepping back. I'm afraid. You get it, he snarled, his patience gone. Foolish. He shoved her aside. Stepping through the doorway. He was tall. He had to duck to get under the frame. He was in. He took one step toward the hearth. Clara, who was standing by the wall, did not scream. She did not run. She took her rifle and, with all her strength, slammed the butt of it against the wall peg. striking the coiled rope. The heavy rawhide, stressed to its limit, snapped. Jedediah heard the sound. He looked up. The log, a 600-pound timber of seasoned pine, fell. It did not hit him cleanly. It struck him a glancing blow on the shoulder and head, driving him to the floor with the sound of cracking bone. He screamed, a high, thin wail, his rifle skittering away. He was not dead, but he was broken. He tried to rise, his left arm dangling at an impossible angle. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Clara did not move. She just watched him, her face a mask of cold fury. He saw something move in the shadows behind her. "Clara!" Silas gasped. Jedediah's eyes swiveled. Silas was not dead. He was sitting up on the cot, his face a sheet of white sweat, and in his hand he held the skinning knife. Jedediah scrambled, trying to reach his rifle. He never made it. Silas lunged. It was not a lunge. It was a fall. He fell from the cot, but he fell forward, driving all his remaining weight, all his rage, all his love, into the single, desperate thrust. The knife went deep into Jedediah's chest. The man's eyes went wide. He made a small, wet sound. And then he was still. The cabin was silent. There was only the sound of Silas, collapsed on top of the dead man, gasping for breath. Clara dropped her rifle. She ran to him, pulling him off the body, dragging him back. You fool!" she wept, holding his head in her lap. "You were supposed to stay still." He coughed, a raw, wet sound. "Heard you talking." He looked at her, his eyes surprisingly clear. "Good trap." And then, as if in a final, spiteful gesture, the lantern Jedediah had thrown onto the porch roof finally caught. The dry, spring-thawed shingles took the flame. Fire began to drip from the ceiling. "The cabin," Clara whispered. "Horrified? Let it burn." Silas gasped. "Get the children. Get me to the dugout." She ran. She grabbed the children, who were huddled, silent and terrified, in their shallow pit. She herded them, crying, out the door and into the dugout. She came back for Silas. The roof was now roaring. Smoke filled the cabin. She grabbed him under the arms, dragging him backward, his boots scraping over the threshold, past the body of Jedediah Dawson, and into the clean, cold, spring air. She got him to the dugout just as the main roof beam of the cabin collapsed, sending a shower of sparks and flame into the twilight sky. She collapsed at the mouth of the dark, damp hole. She was surrounded by the two crying children. She held the head of the man she loved, who was unconscious and bleeding, but breathing. The cabin, their home, was a charred, burning ruin, but they were alive. She spent 3 days in that cold, earthen hole. She kept a small fire at the entrance, hidden by the rocks. She fed the children the last of the cured meat. She boiled water and cleaned Silas's wound again and again. She used the last of the salve, the pine-smelling balm, and she prayed. She did not sleep. She watched him. On the 4th morning, he woke. His eyes were clear. The fever had broken. He looked at her. Her face was smudged with soot, her hair matted, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "Clara," he whispered. "I am here," she said, her voice thick. He looked past her, at the small, sleeping forms of Tom and Eliza. He looked at the cramped, damp walls of the dugout. "He is dead," Silas stated. "They are all dead," she replied. He was quiet for a long time. He turned his head and looked out the small opening, toward the black, smoking ruin of his home. The chimney stood, a lone, stone sentinel. "It is gone," he said, his voice full of a loss that went deeper than the logs and roof. "We are not," she said, fiercely. He looked at her. He saw the iron in her spine. He saw the woman who had fought and killed and saved him. He reached up, his hand still weak, and touched her soot-stained cheek. "I will rebuild," he whispered. It was a promise. Clara leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, a single, hot tear of pure relief tracing a path through the grime. "I know," she said. I am not going anywhere. The dugout was damp and cold, but it was life. For 3 weeks, Silas recovered. Clara was a fierce and tireless nurse. She hunted using the skills he had taught her, bringing back squirrels and rabbits. She foraged for the first edible spring greens, making a thin, bitter soup that tasted of life. She cleaned his wound, her hands steady now. The sight of his blood no longer a terror but a responsibility. He was a good patient in that he was silent, but a bad one in that he fought the weakness, his pride warring with his body's need to heal. The bullet had torn through the muscle of his side, grazing a rib. It was a clean wound, but deep, and the fever had nearly taken him. Tom and Eliza were quiet, their small faces pale. They played in the mouth of the dugout, never straying, their world reduced to this patch of muddy earth and the black, smoking ruin of the cabin across the clearing. The first task, when Silas could finally stand, his arm wrapped around Clara's shoulders, was the burying. The spring thaw had softened the ground. They buried Jedediah and his men in a single, deep grave in the trees, far from the cabin, marked only by a pile of stones. It was grim work. Clara did not weep. She shoveled the dark, wet earth alongside him. It was the closing of a door, the final, necessary act of ending her old life. Then they turned to the ruin. The stone chimney stood, scarred by smoke but intact, a monument to the home that had been. Everything else was ash. It was a good cabin, Silas said, his voice rough. He stood amid the wreckage, his face grim. It was a cell, Clara replied, kicking at a charred beam. You built it to hide. This time, we build a home. He looked at her, at the strength in her face, the smudge of soot on her cheek that she did not know was there. He had come to this mountain to die, slowly, in the quiet. And this woman, in saving herself, had saved him. The new life began with the sound of his axe. He was still weak, the wound pulling at his side, but he refused to rest. He felled new trees, larger ones. From higher up the ridge, the ringing sound echoed through the valley, a sound not of survival, but of defiance. It took months. Spring bled into a warm, bright summer. They lived in the dugout, and as the days grew longer, their life took on a new rhythm. It was not the desperate, frantic pace of fortification, but the slow, steady work of building. Clara worked beside him. She stripped the bark from the new logs, her hands growing calloused and strong. She mixed mud and straw to chink the walls, her arms aching at the end of each day. They were a team, their movements learned, their silence companionable. The new cabin rose from the ashes, anchored to the old chimney. It was larger than the first, with a solid plank floor hewed from a fallen giant pine. He built a real porch, wide and deep, that faced the morning sun. And he built 2 rooms, a large main room for living and a smaller sleeping room for the children. Their cot and cradle, which had been saved in the dugout, were the first things moved in. Clara claimed the patch of earth near the porch. The fire had cleared it, the ash enriching the soil. While Silas built the walls, she built a garden. She had saved a small packet of seeds from the supplies they had taken on their one trip to the mining town, and she planted them with a fierce, hopeful reverence. Beans, squash, and corn. She found the wild herbs that grew by the creek, mint and yarrow, and transplanted them by her door. She was putting down roots, literally. The children, freed from the terror of winter and the confinement of the dugout, bloomed. Eliza, who had been a pale, quiet shadow, was now a robust toddler, her laughter echoing in the clearing as she chased butterflies. Tom became Silas's shadow. He carried tools. He learned to use a small knife, to carve, to set his own small snares for rabbits. His chest puffed with pride when he brought one home for the stew pot. The "sir" had faded, replaced by a simple, trusting Silas. And Silas changed. The scar on his side was a puckered, angry red line, a permanent reminder of the price they had paid. But the scars inside, the ones that had kept him locked in his 5-year silence, had begun to fade. He still did not speak often, But the quiet was different. It was not the heavy, haunted silence of a man remembering his ghosts. It was the content silence of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. He smiled. They were rare, small things, a bare lifting at the corners of his mouth, usually reserved for Eliza when she tried to braid his beard, or for Tom when the boy successfully set a trap. But Clara saw them. Each one was a victory. By late summer, the cabin was done. The larder was stocked with smoked meat and dried berries. The garden was thriving. They had built a life from the ashes of 2 broken ones. But the world was still out there. "We need salt," Silas announced one morning, "and flour before the snows come, and the children need boots." Clara tensed. It was time. "The town?" "The town," he confirmed. "Granite Creek. It is 2 days' ride. We will all go." The journey was not a flight. It was an excursion. They loaded their furs and some of Silas's finer pelts onto the wagon they had built, a sturdy, rough thing. Silas and Tom rode the horses, while Clara and Eliza sat on the wagon seat. They looked like what they were, a family. Granite Creek was a shock, after months of hearing only the wind, the creek, and their own voices. The town was a deafening roar of shouting men, rattling wagons, and the tinny clang of a piano from a saloon. Clara's hands tightened on Eliza's. She had not been in a town, among strangers, since the day she fled. They pulled up to the mercantile. Silas lifted her down from the wagon. "You stay with me," he said, his voice low. They walked in. The store was dark, smelling of coffee beans, new denim, and tobacco. It was full of miners and trappers. Every head turned. Clara felt the heat rise in her face. The whispers started instantly. She was a woman, and a woman who was clearly not a painted lady, but who was just as clearly not a town wife. She was with a mountain man, his beard long, a knife on his belt, his face scarred. "Is that?" A woman in a calico dress whispered to another. "Looks like the woman they were hunting for, the one from Dawson's camp. Heard she killed Jedediah. Ran off with a trapper." Clara felt the old, cold sickness, the shame and fear, rise in her throat. She wanted to turn, to run, to hide in the mountains where she was safe. She took a half step back. Silas did not look at the whisperers. He did not challenge them. He looked at her. He saw the panic in her eyes, the familiar hunted look returning. He reached down and took her hand. His hand was large, warm, and rough as granite. He did not just take her hand. He enveloped it. He laced his fingers through hers, a firm, possessive, and undeniable grip. He turned to the storekeeper, pulling Clara gently forward so she stood beside him, not behind him. "We need flour," he said, his voice a low rumble. 50 pounds, and salt, coffee, and 2 pairs of boots for the children." He did not let go of her hand. He held it as they picked out the cloth. He held it as he traded the pelts. His bargaining sharp and fair. He held it as they paid. And as they walked out the door, the whispers had died. His simple public gesture had been a statement more powerful than any threat. "She is mine. She is protected." As they loaded the wagon, the storekeeper's wife came out, a small, tired-looking woman. She pressed a paper poke of candy into Clara's free hand. "For the children," the woman said, her eyes kind. "It is a hard life up there. You are brave." Clara looked at her, stunned. She nodded, unable to speak. The world was cruel, but not everyone in it was. They rode out of town, Silas's hand still holding hers on the wagon seat, until the sounds of the town faded, and the clean, high mountain quiet returned. They lived in peace for another month. The aspen trees turned a brilliant, shimmering gold. The air grew crisp. Then, one afternoon, a rider came. Silas and Clara were on the porch, mending a harness. They both saw him at the same time. A lone man, riding not up the valley floor, but on the high ridge, the official trail. Silas stood, his hand moving to the rifle that always leaned by the door. "Clara, take the children inside." "Wait," she said, her hand on his arm. The man was not a bounty hunter. He wore a clean, dark suit, and a tin star glittered on his vest. He rode steadily, not searching, but heading directly for their cabin. He reined in at the edge of the clearing. He did not dismount. He looked at the new, sturdy cabin, at the garden, at the children who peeked from behind Clara's skirts. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. Ward, my name is Marshal Evans. I am a federal marshal for the territory. You are a long way from home." "Marshal," Silas said, his voice flat. His hand did not leave his rifle. "I am," Evans agreed, his gaze sharp and assessing. "I'm up here investigating a report, a rumor, you might say, about Jedediah Dawson and 2 of his hired men. They rode into this valley in the spring, and they did not ride out." Clara stepped forward. "They are dead." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "Just like that." "Just like that," Clara said, her voice steady. "They came for me. They had a false warrant. They believed I had something that belonged to them. When I refused to come, they tried to burn us out. They set fire to our home." She pointed to the tall, stone chimney. "That is all that was left." "And the 3 of them?" Evans asked, his gaze moving from her to Silas. "We defended ourselves," Silas said. "It was a fair fight. They lost." The marshal was silent for a long minute. He looked at Silas, a known recluse, but not a known killer. He looked at Clara. "Jedediah Dawson was an important man, ma'am, powerful. His bank is claiming theft. The men he was with, they were bounty hunters, but they were deputized. I cannot just ride away from 3 dead men." Clara met his gaze. The last of her fear was gone, burned away with the cabin. "Marshal," she said, "may I show you something?" She went inside. Silas stood, a silent guardian, watching the marshal. She returned a moment later. She did not carry a weapon. She carried a single, folded piece of paper, the last letter, the one she had saved. She handed it up to him. "My husband, Arthur Dawson, wrote this the day before he died." Marshal Evans unfolded the letter. He read it. His expression, at first skeptical, hardened. He read it a second time, his lips moving slightly, taking in the words. 20,000 in gold. Jedediah knows. They will kill me. Clara suspects nothing. She is a good woman. I have destroyed her." He folded the letter. He looked from it to her and back. He had seen enough of the world to know the ring of truth. This letter, combined with Jedediah's known reputation, painted a clear, ugly picture. "He stole the gold," Clara said quietly. "He was murdered for it. His father, Jedediah, believed I knew where it was. He was not hunting me for justice. Marshal, he was hunting me for profit. He would have killed me. He would have killed my children." The marshal sighed, a long, weary sound. He tucked the letter into his own breast pocket. "No," Clara said, holding out her hand. "That is mine." Evans looked at her, surprised. He handed it back. "I see," he said. He looked at the cabin, at the children, at the chimney. "It seems to me Jedediah Dawson and his men died while attempting to kidnap and extort a private citizen. In my report, I will find that they were likely caught in a late blizzard, or perhaps fell afoul of a wolf pack. The mountains are dangerous." He gathered his reins. "My apologies for disturbing your peace, Mrs." He paused. "Clara," she said. "Ma'am, Mr. Ward." He tipped his hat. "I do not think you will be bothered again." He turned his horse and rode away, the last ghost of her past disappearing with him. That night, the new cabin was still. The children were asleep in their own room, safe. The first cold snap of autumn was in the air, but a fire roared in the great stone hearth. Clara and Silas sat on the porch, wrapped in a single, heavy fur blanket, watching the stars, a vast, cold spray of diamonds in the black sky. They had celebrated. They had drunk the last of the whiskey, a silent toast to the marshal, to their new life. Silas had been quiet for an hour, his hands busy in his lap, carving a small piece of antler, a tine from the great elk they had hunted together. He stopped his work. He reached for her left hand. It was bare. She had taken off Arthur's old, cold, golden ring weeks ago and dropped it into the bottom of her sewing basket. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. He held out what he had been carving. It was a ring. It was not fine or gold. It was made of bone, polished smooth as glass and etched with the delicate, tiny petals of a wildflower. He took her hand. He slid the carved ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "You are not my guest anymore," he said, his voice low, his gaze locked on hers. "You are not a refugee. You are not hiding." He paused, searching for the words he had never learned to use. He held her hand to his chest. "You are my home." Clara looked at the ring, at his strong, scarred hand holding hers. The tears that came were not of fear or of grief. They were of a peace so profound it ached. She lifted her other hand, touching his rough, bearded cheek. "I was always yours, Silas," she whispered. "From the night you tended my burn, I just did not know it." He pulled her to him. His embrace was slow, powerful, and absolute. It was not the desperate, frantic clutching of two people finding each other in the dark. It was the deep, steady, unbreakable hold of two people who had built a life, who had fought for it, and who had won. The wild around them, the high, dark mountains, the coming winter. It was still dangerous. It would always be, but it was not their enemy. It was their sanctuary. They had built something in the heart of it, something stronger than tragedy, stronger than fire, something that would endure. The stars faded. The sky in the east turned a pale, pearlister gray, then a deep, bruised purple. The first rays of the sun struck the high, snow-dusted peaks, bathing them in light. Two figures stood on the porch, hand in hand, watching the dawn. They were scarred. They were survivors. And they were, at last, at the edge of a new beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Clara and Silas. We would love to know where you are listening from. So please, drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories just like this one. We value your thoughts, so please share them with us in English.